Oberyn Martell and Jaime Lannister. I think the only real question you can ask about these two is, who's more dreamy? Oh, right. Welcome to our new series, Who's Better, Who's Worse, where we take two characters from a fictional franchise, and unlike traditional versus matchup videos you see all over YouTube, it won't always come down to who comes out on top if they fight. We may pit them head to head in a contest of who has the better character arc, who's the biggest bastard of a villain, who's the better hero, who redeemed themselves more. You get the idea. Anyway, let's not waste any more time. Today we're pitting Jaime Lannister against Prince Oberyn Martell, and the cup they're competing for is... drumroll, who's the better warrior? Look, I know we said it'd be different to other versus vids, but it is the pilot. We would like to play it safe. Of course, we'll be taking Jaime in his prime, which is obviously before losing his hand. Any feats or personality changes after this, whether it's good or bad development for him, aren't applicable because you can't have your cake and eat it. Before we get into the criteria we'll be judging these characters on, we will, if possible, try to find the Word of God and their thoughts. For those unfamiliar, the Word of God is the author/creator's thoughts on their characters, and while it holds weight, it doesn't mean they aren't open to scrutiny, as even the Word of God can sometimes contradict itself. Look no further than Mr. George Lucas on that one, bless him. George R.R. Martin's thoughts on both characters are that Oberyn is one of the greatest overall warriors around at the time, but Jaime is one of the greatest swordsmen, not just around at the time, but in the history of the Thronesverse. So we have a damn good matchup here. Each video will come with a set of criteria relevant to the field the characters are competing over, and we'll give our thoughts on who comes out on top of each category and why. So let's start with physicality. Jaime is around 32 years old before he loses his hand, so he's in his physical prime, which is between 25 to 35 for most biological males. We know there is roughly a 7 to 8 years difference between him and Oberyn, which places Oberyn at the other side of 30, possibly 40 years old. So outside his prime, but only just. Height-wise, George has said that Jaime is between 6 to 6'2", so tall but not significantly so, and while we don't have any numbers for Oberyn, he is described as tall, so we can place him around the same height, with the inch difference between them likely minuscule and worthless. Jaime is described as strong, muscular and fit, and Oberyn fast, lean and also fit. When it comes to judging this one, it's hard. Both have warrior physiques, fitness levels, and neither has a significant height and therefore reach advantage over the other. Just from build, we can deduce Jaime likely has a strength advantage, while Oberyn will possess greater agility, which is not to be confused with speed, by the way. They are likely comparable in speed, with Jaime potentially being faster. Both have amazing endurance, demonstrated when Oberyn fought the big guy in a protracted duel, and Jaime when he nearly killed Brienne while starving, fatigued, and emaciated. What this comes down to is age. Sorry guys, but age matters. Even the best fighters start slowing down once past their prime. So one can only imagine what a total fucking monster Barristan was in his youth. Sheesh. Jaime is in his full prime, Oberyn is outside of it, if only just. And with that, we can give Jaime the edge in physicality. Next, we move on to training and weapon specialization. This one is far more simple, both are of High Lord status. I know Oberyn's a prince, but in essence they are in the same league of social standing, and as such, they both would have received the best possible training from youth in all the weapons of war, the use of various armors, and battlefield tactics. Where we can make a distinction between them is reputation. Jaime is reputed to be one of the greatest swordsmen ever, so we know for a fact he has a weapon preference and is of prodigy caliber when it comes to this chosen specialization.
I demand trial by combat.
I wouldn't be too glad, sir. I name my brother, Jaime Lannister.
When it comes to Oberyn, we all think we know his specialization, and that it's the spear. Makes sense considering House Martell's banner, right? Well, no. Oberyn isn't reputed as one of the greatest spearmen alive. He's reputed to be one of the greatest warriors, leading me and Tom to think he doesn't actually have a signature weapon or specialization. He's just very good with multiple weapons rather than a grandmaster with one. More on this when we get to the versatility section. When it comes to this criteria, it's extremely clear-cut. Both will have comparable training, and both are said to be naturally talented and skilled, but no one touts Oberyn as the greatest at one thing. People do, however, say that Jaime is something special with a sword in hand. Jaime clearly gets the edge in weapon specialization and training. Oof, it's not looking good for our sweet prince here, Tom.
That's all, Your Grace.
On to versatility and adaptability. Make no mistake, Jaime will be pretty good with other weapons than just his sword. He's a fully trained knight after all. Axes, warhammers, spears, maces, polearms, lances, he'll know what he's doing with them. However, when we hear about his deeds and the battles he's fought in, he's always taking care of business with a sword in hand. Jaime seems to be so good with that one weapon that he's never had the need to switch it up in order to beat someone. A testament to just how good he is, but also a huge black mark on his ability to adapt. Oberyn, on the other hand, or shall we say with another hand, burn, doesn't have the same wealth of stories, but from what we can deduce seems to be incredibly versatile and adaptable in his weapon choice. Take this scene from the show.
Longsword is a bad option in close quarters.
It's a small, show-only scene, but combined with his fight with the Mountain, it tells us an awful lot about Oberyn's mentality in a fight. He isn't going to pick the weapon that he's most skilled in and plays to his own strengths. He's going to pick the weapon that counters his opponent's weapon choice and plays directly against theirs. A lot of people think Oberyn's preferred weapon is a spear and to fight lightly armored. This isn't really the case. It was his preferred weapon and armor choice to fight the Mountain specifically. The spear compensated his lack of reach by giving him a 2-foot reach advantage, allowing him to poke at the gaps in the Mountain's armor while keeping him out of the 6-foot kill zone of Gregor's sword, and he likely recognized that plate might, and that's a big might considering Gregor's strength behind the weight of a 6-foot greatsword, give him a safety net if he got hit, but traded off its high level of protection in order to stay mobile and not get hit in the first place, keeping him fresh while the heavy armor-clad Gregor tired himself out and started slowing down. We feel pretty confident saying that were Oberyn's opponent a small agile speed fencer like Syrio Forel, then he would have adjusted his weapons and armor accordingly to disadvantage that type of fighter, though in fairness, spear is still a good shout for that, to be honest. With this in mind, and combined with what we'll mention in the experience category, it's not unreasonable to assume Oberyn is extremely adaptable and versatile in his approach, able to wield and deal with the conventional and the unconventional when it comes to weaponry and fighting styles, and because of this, he gets a well-deserved edge. There's a joke to be made here about how their versatility, or lack thereof, reflects their taste in lovers. But too late now. Next time, Tom. Next time. On to experience. Now, Jaime's been in some scuffs, let's be fair. He fought the Kingswood Brotherhood and fought and survived the Smiling Knight, essentially the Mountain of his day, when he was only 15. And it's almost pretty much a given he took part in the Greyjoy rebellions, and since our main man Bobby B needed absolutely no one to protect him back then, was likely able to get stuck in and do his own thing. But in regards to life and death combat, that's about it.
Someone forgot to write down all your great deeds.
Unfortunately for Jaime, he spent most of his time during Robert's rebellion guarding the Mad King, and Bobby B's reign was one of relative peace. There may have been some minor scuffs here and there, but none of note. Jaime's primary experience outside of training was mainly in tournaments fighting conventional Westerosi knights, which, while educational, dangerous, and potentially life-threatening, were not quite the life and death situations of real battle, and did not expose him to much beyond the norm.
Very handsome armor. Not a scratch on it.
I know. People have been swinging at me for years, but they always seem to miss.
Choosing your opponents wisely, then.
I have a knack for it.
On to Oberyn, and I think you know where I'm going with this. Our prince spent quite a few years traveling the world, fighting in the Disputed Lands as a mercenary with the Second Sons, and then founding and fighting with his own company. Needless to say, a fair bit of real battle experience. It's also implied that he spent some time in the fighting pits of Meereen, leading us to logically assume he's faced all manner of adversary, from conventional knights to water dancers, Dothraki, to the more unconventional and esoteric gladiatorial forms of combat, which implies he also has a fair bit of life and death dueling experience. Do we have to drag this one out? Oberyn is leaps and bounds more experienced than Jaime, and has likely dealt with a wider variety of fighting styles, giving him a clear and decisive edge. Let's move on to cunning, fight IQ, and personality flaws. Just to be clear, when we say fight IQ, we mean a combatant's ability to think and adjust their technique on the fly to exploit gaps and defensive openings, and when we say cunning, we are referring to slightly underhanded or pre-planned tactics. When it comes to fight IQ, Jaime scores pretty damn high. He chooses to use a sword, not the greatest weapon for fighting armored knights, unless you really know what you're doing with it.
I'm going to open your lord from balls to brains.
Jaime must really know what he's doing with it, as he was able to cut down 10 assumingly well-armored and battlefield-equipped men on his way to rob Stark and not die. This speaks to his ability to make best technical use of his weapon to create and exploit the openings and gaps in better armed opponents. Where Jaime loses points is his cunning. He seems, from what we gather, to prefer something that resembles a fair contest, and let his overwhelming skill do the talking for him. Along with a lack of forward planning, he seems to only think one move ahead and deal with the future when it's the present.
I like to improvise. That explains the golden hand.
Jaime is also quite flawed on the personality front. Remember, this is before Hand goes bye-bye. He is highly arrogant and prideful, often gloating before the battle is even won. And unlike Oberyn, it appears to be more arrogance for arrogance sake rather than a psychological warfare tactic. Oberyn also scores high on the fight IQ front, demonstrating a rather effortless ability to herd the mountain around like an animal and exploit nearly every opening both he and the mountain created, though in fairness he did have the weapon advantage. Where Oberyn really has Jaime licked though is cunning. We all know what I'm about to address. Oberyn employs poison on his weapons, ensuring that one cut will kill his opponent even if he dies in the process. The fact he uses poison also demonstrates how far he thinks ahead, which is further backed up by his loadout for facing Gregor, tailoring his weapons and armor to his opponent's disadvantage. Needless to say, Oberyn pays attention to who he's fighting and plans accordingly. On the personality front, many mistake Oberyn for arrogant, due to his taunting of the mountain and demanding a confession once Gregor was down. But this is an often misunderstood aspect of Oberyn's character. Oberyn is highly confident, that much is true, and in fairness, rightfully so. But his arrogance and taunting during the fight was more a psychological warfare tactic, to incense the mountain and provoke him into giving chase. And he only got too close when the mountain was 1. On his back suffering multiple poisonous wounds, 2. Hamstrung and unable to stand, and 3. Had a poison spear broken off in his belly. I don't think it's arrogant to expect the fight to be over at that point, even for a monster like Gregor. He gets close and demands a confession because it's his one and only chance to implicate Tywin and justifiably punish him. If Gregor dies, that chance is lost forever. It's more fair to say that Oberyn was recklessly desperate in that particular circumstance, and in general is highly emotional and vengeful regarding Lannisters, something that we do have to consider in this matchup due to who he's facing.
It is rare to meet a Lannister who shares my enthusiasm for dead Lannisters.
But we think it's fair to say that while passionate and full of life in general, he's probably more calm and measured under normal dueling circumstances. When it comes to who wins this category, we're going to go with Oberyn. Jaime is too reliant on his natural and trained talent and fight IQ, and while Oberyn may not be as gifted, he's still in that same high league, and his ability to think ahead and adjust accordingly is far, far, far more valuable in our opinion. Both are flawed personality-wise, but Oberyn's emotional instability and vengeful attitude won't be a problem here, as he doesn't need a confession from Jaime. Just killing him quickly would be enough to destroy Tywin, whereas Jaime's arrogance might get him bit on the arse by the Viper's poisoned fangs. And our final category before we decide who we think will win? Equipment. Yay, funnest for last. There isn't really much to say on their equipment, as neither has a Valyrian steel weapon. Remember, Jaime before losing his hand. And both come from the same social standing, which means they'll have access to pretty much the same quality of equipment in terms of armor and steel. Where we can give Oberyn some points of favor is that his weapons will most certainly be poisoned, and if he opts for his spear, he'll obviously have the reach advantage. But it's a minor advantage at best, considering Jaime will be faster than the mountain with a tighter defense and more skill in guarding his openings and unarmored spots. So with that said, we're just gonna call it a draw for this category. So who is the greatest warrior of the two? Who would win if they fought? Who's taking home that cup? The greatest warrior aspect of this honestly comes down to your opinion, though we will try to make our case.
Come on, that's a bunch of horse shit.
We'll not beat around the bush here. It's Oberyn, pretty much every time too.
I will be your champion.
How do I explain this in a satisfying way, Tom, before they start raging at me?
I missed the part where that's my problem.
See, in video, tabletop, and card games, you have something known as meta, or most effective technique available. Basically, the current most powerful character, card, or playstyle for that chosen game that beats almost everything thrown at it. Then you have the anti-meta. Now, the anti-meta isn't as powerful as the meta and can't beat most things. However, it is specifically designed to systematically cause the meta to crumble. Jaime is the meta of swordsmanship, the peak, able to take down anyone else trying to match his skill and fighting style with a similar or comparable skill and fighting style. Jaime will choose sword, shield, and plate because he is the best at that combo and can beat most things with it. He won't think ahead and play solely to his strengths alone. Oberyn is, you guessed it, the anti-meta, planning and picking his weapons and loadout to not beat most things thrown his way or play to his personal strengths, but to dismantle the meta of his opponent specifically. It mainly comes down to the fact he's incredibly cunning and thinks well ahead. He'll study Jaime, learn where he's strongest, learn where he's weakest, learn what makes him tick, and learn what makes him crack. Then pick a weapon, probably some sort of polearm, armor, probably plate, shield, something light and maneuverable, and fighting tactic, probably leveraging Jaime's arrogance somehow, that nullifies all of Jaime's advantages, just like he did with the mountain. We also all know Oberyn's blade will be poisoned, and we all know it only takes one tiny nick of Jaime's skin for him to become dead meat. Even if he runs Oberyn through, he'll still lose, as odds of him getting through the duel untouched are very small considering the caliber of opponent. The skill difference between the two, while in Jaime's favor, is just not big enough for him to overcome the highly unfavorable setup Oberyn will most definitely orchestrate. Sometimes it's just better to be smart and experienced rather than strong and talented. Oberyn, sweet prince, you are the better warrior. In our opinion. Must stress in our opinion. Crap, Tom, I can hear the Jaime fans coming for me. They're breaking down the door. Come on, run, run! And that's our take. What did we get right, what did we miss, and what did we get wrong? I'm sure you'll have no problem telling us. Cheerio. Come on, Tom, run, run, run! Be sure to be on the lookout for our follow-up, Who's Worse, Ramsay Bolton or Gregor Clegane, and be sure to like and subscribe and check out our previous videos. Support is a hell of a motivator, guys.